You know those moments, those flashes of pure joy and really profound insight where you feel utterly connected, completely alive.
Absolutely. Like you're plugged into something bigger.
Exactly. Abraham Maslow called them peak experiences, didn't he? Moments you're sort of catapulted beyond the mundane.
Peak experiences, or maybe even peak experiences, like a little peek behind the curtain.
Oh, I like that. A peek into what the eternal realm of being.
hmm
And if you're anything like me, the immediate thought is, okay, how do I stay here? How do I take up permanent residence?
It's that feeling of coming home, isn't it? To your true self, even if it's just for a second. And that longing to stay, to really live there, well, that's a powerful driver for transformation.
It really is. Today, we're taking a deep dive into excerpts from Eckhart Tolle's, well, seminal work, The Power of Now.
And it's not just another self-help book, is it? Totally positions it as something arriving at a really crucial time.
He does. He suggests humanity is going through this quantum leap in its evolution. And that comes with a fundamental shift in our whole worldview, our basic picture of the way things are.
And that shift impacts everything, doesn't it? From our personal relationships right up to, well, global societies.
Right.
What's truly fascinating is how Tolle's insights really challenge our deepest assumptions about reality.
Yeah, they offer a truly transformative way of understanding ourselves and, the universe.
hmm
So our mission today is to unpack these core ideas, ideas about consciousness, the nature of the mind, and the profound liberation that comes from truly living in the present moment.
We're hoping to offer a kind of shortcut, maybe, to understanding these pretty radical ideas and how they might apply to your own life.
Exactly. So what does this all mean for you? Okay, so as we peel back the layers here, we start by kind of dismantling the foundations of how we see things, right? Challenging some really deeply ingrained myths.
Yeah, what are these established myths that this emerging worldview is calling into question?
Well, what's fascinating is how these paradigm pioneers Toyle draws on, how they identify these core assumptions that are now being, well, overturned.
Right.
The first myth, for instance, is that comfortable belief that humanity has kind of arrived, that we've reached the pinnacle of our development.
Wait, you mean we're not there yet? That feels both, I don't know, humbling and also incredibly hopeful.
Doesn't it? It implies there's just so much more potential still waiting to be unlocked.
Precisely. Michael Murphy, co-founder of Esalen, he draws on all these diverse fields: religious studies, medical science, sports,
Right.
and he makes this provocative case for more advanced stages of human development. And as people reach these stages, these extraordinary capacities can just blossom. Things like love, vitality, personhood, intuition, perception.
Wow.
Yeah, even communication and volition. But the first step, the really crucial step, is simply recognizing these possibilities exist. And most people just don't.
So just knowing it's possible is the key. Imagine if you could consciously develop capacities far beyond what we think of as normal.
That's the idea. Recognizing the potential is the critical first step.
Okay, so we're not done evolving. We're maybe just getting started. If that's myth number one, what's the second big belief being challenged?
The second myth is this pervasive belief that we are completely separate. Separate from each other, separate from nature, separate from the cosmos, the universe.
The myth of other than me, as the source calls it.
Exactly. And it's actually blamed for so much human suffering. Wars, environmental destruction, injustice. I mean, the idea is profound. Who in their right mind would intentionally harm another if they truly experience that person as part of themselves?
That makes a lot of intuitive sense, but, our traditional science often points towards separation. Is there any actual evidence for this interconnectedness beyond just a feeling?
That's a great question. And yes, there is. Stan Grof's research, for example, looking into non-ordinary states of consciousness, it suggests that, quote, the psyche and consciousness of each of us is commensurate with all that is. Why? Because apparently there are no absolute boundaries between the body ego and the totality of existence.
Wow. No absolute boundaries.
And even in modern medicine, you have people like Dr. Larry Dossey. His Era 3 medicine research shows compelling evidence that one person's thoughts, their attitudes, their healing intentions, they can literally influence another person's physiology.
Like the healing power of prayer, for instance.
Exactly. Stuff like that. It seems to defy traditional physics or a standard scientific worldview, yet, as the source says, the preponderance of evidence suggests that indeed it does.
So if we really felt interconnected, imagine what societal problems might just dissolve. It really makes you
Yeah.
question things. What if our deepest assumptions about separation are just wrong?
It's a radical thought, isn't it?
It really is. It challenges the very fabric of how we've built our societies.
Mhm.
So, okay, if we're not separate, what about the nature of reality itself? Does Tolle, or the sources he uses, challenge our view of the physical world as being all there is?
Absolutely. That's the third myth. The notion that this physical world, what we can touch and see, is the only reality. Traditional science tends to be, as the source puts it, materialistically bound.
Right, assuming only what can be measured physically.
Exactly. But the emerging view suggests something different, an extended multidimensional model of reality. Reality spanning from the dense and least conscious, what we call matter, all the way to the least dense and most conscious, the spiritual realm.
And even modern physics hints at this.
It does. Quantum theorists like Jack Scarfetti talk about things like superluminal travel, faster than light speed, and explain it through other dimensions of reality. David Bohm's work on the explicate physical and implicate non-physical multidimensional reality points this way too.
And in that experiment in France, the aspect experiment.
Right, the 1982 aspect experiment. It showed that two quantum particles, once connected but then separated by vast distances, remained somehow linked. If one changed, the other changed instantly. Faster than light.
Faster than light.
Oh.
Well, theorists suggest this connection happens via doorways into higher dimensions.
Yeah.
So the overall shift these pioneers Tully spoke with agree on is this. Humanity has not reached its peak. We are fundamentally connected, and reality encompasses both the physical and a multitude of non-physical dimensions.
Okay, that's truly mind-bending. It completely flips our everyday experience of time and space. So, putting it all together, if we're not at our peak, if we are connected, and reality is multidimensional, what's the core message here?
It's a powerful one. This new worldview involves seeing yourself, seeing others, seeing all of life, not through the eyes of the small earthly self, the one born in time, but through the eyes of the soul, our being, our true self.
And this isn't just theory.
No, the sources suggest people are actually making this shift. They're jumping to this higher orbit, as one puts it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a powerful setup. So what's really at the heart of this old worldview that holds us back from these, well, profound insights and transformations? The sources point to Eckhart Tolle's central message here.
Yes, Tolle explains it masterfully. He says, the problem of humanity is deeply rooted in the mind itself, or rather, our misidentification with mind. This is absolutely central to his work.
And he came to this through personal experience, right? A pretty intense one.
Extremely intense. He shares this story. One night, not long after his 29th birthday, he woke up with just absolute dread, more intense than ever before. Everything felt alien, so hostile, and so utterly meaningless. Just a deep, deep loathing of the world and even of his own existence. A longing for annihilation, he says, stronger than the desire to live.
It's incredibly dark.
It is. And in that state, he had this thought, I cannot live with myself any longer. And then this peculiar realization hit him. Am I one or two? If I cannot live with myself, there must be two of me. The I and the self that I cannot live with.
Wow, the I and the self.
Exactly. And he wondered, maybe only one of them is real. That thought just stunned him, he says. And his mind stopped.
Just stop.
Completely. He was fully conscious, but there were no more thoughts. He felt drawn into this vortex of energy, gripped by intense fear, shaking. He heard words inside his chest saying, resist nothing. He felt sucked into a void, but it felt like it was inside him, not outside. And suddenly the fear was gone. He just let myself fall into that void.
And what happened when he came out of that?
He woke later to a bird chirping. He saw the image of a precious diamond, opened his eyes, felt there was infinitely more to light than we realize. The dawn light filtering in felt like love itself. Tears came. He recognized his room, but felt he'd never truly seen it before. Everything was fresh and pristine. He was just marveling at the beauty and aliveness of it all.
That sounds like a complete rebirth, almost. A profound shift in perception. So if that's the deeper reality, what's the biggest obstacle stopping us from experiencing it more often?
Tolle is very clear on this. The greatest obstacle is identification with your mind, which causes thought to become compulsive.
Compulsive thinking.
Yes. He says, not to be able to stop thinking is a dreadful affliction, but we don't realize this because almost everybody is suffering from it, so it's considered normal.
That's a powerful statement. It's just normal background noise for most people.
Exactly. This incessant mental noise, as he calls it, prevents us from accessing that inner stillness, which he says is inseparable from being. It also creates this false mind-made self that casts a shadow of fear and suffering.
A false self. The ego.
Essentially, yes. He warns that thinking has become a disease. Why? Because disease happens when things get out of balance. Like cells dividing uncontrollably, disregarding the whole organism. Thought becomes destructive when it runs rampant.
But the mind is useful, surely.
Oh, absolutely. Tolle clarifies. The mind is a superb instrument if used rightly. Used wrongly, however, it becomes very destructive. But then he refines it. More accurately, it is not so much that you use your mind wrongly. You usually don't use it at all. It uses you.
Ah, that's the key distinction.
This is the disease, he says. You believe that you are your mind. This is the delusion. The instrument has taken you over.
So it's not that we use our mind badly, it's that the mind uses us. That flips everything. He illustrates this with a dialogue in the book, right?
It does. Someone is asked if they can be free of their mind anytime they want. And the answer is basically, no, I can't, except maybe for a moment or two.
Which is probably true for most of us.
Great. And Tolle's response is direct. Then the mind is using you. You are unconsciously identified with it, so you don't even know that you are its slave.
Wow. So how do we begin to break free?
He says, the beginning of freedom is the realization that you are not the possessing entity, the thinker. Just realizing that is the start. This enables you to observe it. And the moment you start watching the thinker, a higher level of consciousness becomes activated.
A higher level.
Yes, you realize there is a vast realm of intelligence beyond thought, that thought is only a tiny aspect of that intelligence. And crucially, he says, all the things that truly matter, beauty, love, creativity, joy, inner peace arise from beyond the mind. This, he concludes, is when you begin to awaken.
Watching the thinker. It sounds simple, but what does it really mean in practice? I mean, for many of us, that inner voice just feels like us.
Tolle uses a striking comparison here. He says, if someone walks down the street talking to themselves, we think they're mad. But if they say, I hear a voice in my head, they're sent to a psychiatrist.
Right.
Yet, he points out, virtually everyone hears a voice, or several voices, in their head all the time. The involuntary thought processes that you don't realize you have the power to stop.
That internal monologue or dialogue.
Exactly. These continuous monologues or dialogues, not really much different from the person talking aloud on the street, except we keep it inside. And what does this voice do? It comments, speculates, judges, compares, complains, likes, dislikes.
Constantly narrating and evaluating.
All the time. Often reviving the past or imagining negative future scenarios, what we call worry. Sometimes even with visual mental movies. This voice, he says, belongs to your conditioned mind, seeing the present through the distorting lens of the past, giving a totally distorted view. Often, he argues, it's a person's own worst enemy, attacking, punishing, draining vital energy, causing misery and even disease.
Okay, so the practice isn't to silence it necessarily, but to listen with awareness.
Precisely. When you listen to that thought, you are aware not only of the thought, but also of yourself as the witness of the thought. He says a new dimension of consciousness has come in. You start to feel a conscious presence, your deeper self behind or underneath the thought.
And what happens to the thought then?
It loses its power over you and quickly subsides. Why? Because you are no longer energizing the mind through identification with it. This, Tolle says, is the beginning of the end of involuntary and compulsive thinking.
But many people might hear thinking is a disease and immediately push back. We think, wait, thinking is essential for survival. We need to plan, solve problems, make decisions. How does Tolle address that very practical need?
He definitely clarifies that. He says your mind is an instrument, a tool. It's meant for specific tasks, and you should be able to lay it down when the task is done.
Like a hammer, you don't carry it around all day.
Exactly. But he estimates, and this is striking, that about 80 to 90% of most people's thinking is not only repetitive and useless, but because of its dysfunctional and often negative nature, much of it is also harmful.
80 to 90%, that's huge.
It is. He says it causes a serious leakage of vital energy. He actually calls this compulsive thinking an addiction. The mind, he explains, is essentially a survival machine. Its strengths are attack and defense against other minds, gathering, storing, and analyzing information. This is what it is good at, but it is not at all creative.
Okay, that's a fascinating distinction. So creativity doesn't come from the mind, or at least not solely.
Not primarily, according to Tolle. He asserts that all true artists create from a place of no mind, from inner stillness. The mind then comes in later to give form to the creative impulse or insight.
Like shaping the raw material.
Precisely. And he points out that even great scientists, including Einstein, reported their creative breakthroughs came during moments of mental quietude. He mentions a study of eminent mathematicians which found that thinking plays only a subordinate part in the brief, decisive phase of the creative act itself.
So the real spark comes from stillness.
That's his argument. Tolle concludes, the simple reason why the majority of scientists are not creative is not because they don't know how to think, but because they don't know how to stop thinking.
Wow. That really turns the usual idea of genius on its head.
Doesn't it? He also points out that life itself, your own body, were created and are sustained by an intelligence at work that is far greater than the mind. He uses the example of DNA in a single human cell containing instructions that would fill 1,000 books of 600 pages each.
An unbelievable complexity.
Right. And his point is, when the mind reconnects with that greater intelligence, then it becomes a most wonderful tool. It then serves something greater than itself.
Okay, so the mind, when misused or allowed to run rampant, creates suffering. What about our emotions? Are they just another layer of this mental noise, or are they something different?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture Tully paints, emotions are very much linked to the mind. He describes them as the body's reflection of unconscious mental processes.
So a thought happens in the head, and emotion happens in the body.
That's a good way to put it. It says, while a thought is in your head, an emotion has a strong physical component, and so is primarily felt in the body. And interestingly, watching an emotion is basically the same practice as watching a thought.
How so?
You can allow the emotion to be there without being controlled by it. You shift from being the emotion to being the observer. You no longer are the emotion, you are the watcher, the observing presence. And this process, he says, brings all that is unconscious in you into the light of consciousness.
That sounds like a powerful way to disarm negative emotions. But what about positive ones? Joy, love, peace.
Yeah.
Are those just mental reflections too?
He makes a distinction there. Those glimpses of love, joy, or deep peace, he says, are inseparable from your natural state of interconnectedness with being.
So they come from a deeper place.
Yes. They happen when a gap occurs in the stream of thought, maybe triggered by great beauty, extreme physical exertion, or even great danger. Something that momentarily stops the mind. That creates inner stillness. And within that stillness, there is a subtle but intense joy. There is love. There is peace.
But they're usually short-lived.
Often, yes, because the mind quickly resumes its noise-making. Tolle actually states that love, joy, and peace are beyond the emotions on a much deeper level. He points out the word emotion literally means disturbance. It comes from the Latin movere, meaning to disturb.
So true peace is undisturbed. It's beyond emotion.
Exactly. You need to become fully conscious of your emotions, the disturbances, before you can really feel what lies beyond them.
And that disturbance, that resistance, that's where suffering comes from.
Precisely. Toll states, the greater part of human pain is unnecessary. It is self-created as long as the unobserved mind runs your life. Pain, in its various forms, is essentially a form of non-acceptance, some form of unconscious resistance to what is.
Resistance to the present moment.
Yes. On the thought level, this resistance shows up as judgment. On the emotional level, it manifests as negativity. And the intensity of the pain depends on the degree of resistance to the present moment, which in turn depends on how strongly you are identified with your mind.
So the equation is simple. More mind identification equals more suffering.
That's the core idea. The more you are identified with your mind, the more you suffer. And he highlights why the mind does this. The mind always seeks to deny the now and to escape from it.
Why? Why does the mind always deny the now? What's so threatening about the present moment for the mind?
Because, Polle argues, the mind cannot function and remain in control without time. It needs past and future to operate, so it perceives the timeless now as inherently threatening to its dominance.
Because the now is outside of time.
Exactly. He says, time and mind are in fact inseparable. He uses this great analogy. Imagine Earth without humans, just plants and animals. Would it still have a past and a future? Could we still speak of time in any meaningful way?
Probably not. An eagle wouldn't ask, what time is it?
Right. An oak tree or an eagle would be bemused by that question. Well, of course it's now. The time is now. What else is there?
So while we need mind and time to function practically,
Yes, we need them for daily life. But there comes a point where they take over our lives, and this is where dysfunction, pain, and sorrow set in. The mind seeks continuously to cover up the present moment with past and future, and in doing so, it obscures the vitality and infinite creative potential of being, which is inseparable from the now.
and this accumulation of psychological time, it doesn't just obscure the now, it carries forward past pain.
Exactly. This accumulation of time in the psyche also holds a vast amount of residual pain from the past.
And this leads us right to a really crucial concept in Tolley's work, the pain body. For those familiar with it, let's dive into how it keeps us stuck and, maybe more importantly, how we can break free.
Indeed, this is a key insight. Suffering isn't just random negativity. Often, it's this entity he calls the pain body. He defines it as trapped life energy that has split off from your total energy field and has temporarily become autonomous through the unnatural process of mind identification.
So it's like a semi-independent energy field fueled by past pain and mind identification.
Exactly. And it becomes anti-life, he says, like an animal trying to devour its own tail. This helps explain, perhaps, why our civilization has become so life-destructive.
And how does it keep us trapped?
When you start to disidentify, to become the watcher, the pain body doesn't just vanish. It will actively try to trick you back into identification. It has a certain momentum, like a spinning wheel that keeps going. It might even manifest as physical aches and pains.
So what's the key to dissolving it?
Stay present, stay conscious, be the ever-alert guardian of your inner space. You need to be present enough to be able to watch the pain body directly and feel its energy without getting sucked into the thoughts about the pain.
Feel the energy, not the story.
Precisely. Then it can't control your thinking. Sustained conscious attention severs the link between the pain body and your thought processes and brings about the process of transmutation.
Transmutation.
Like alchemy. Exactly like alchemy. He says, it is as if the pain becomes fuel for the flame of your consciousness, which then burns more brightly as a result. This, he argues, is the esoteric meaning of the ancient art of alchemy. The transmutation of base metal into gold, of suffering into consciousness. The split within you heals, you become whole again. Our core responsibility, then, is simply not to create further pain.
That's a powerful reframing suffering, not as something to just endure or avoid, but as potential fuel for awakening.
Yes, and he identifies a unique aspect of this for women tied to a collective historical experience. He notes that for many women, the pain body awakens particularly at the time preceding the menstrual flow.
The collective female pain body.
Right. He links this to the accumulated pain suffered by women, partly through male subjugation of the female, through slavery, exploitation, rape, childbirth, child loss, and so on over thousands of years. But instead of just being a burden, he suggests this can become an opportunity for the most powerful spiritual practice, and a rapid transmutation of all past pain becomes possible.
Okay, so the mind creates pain, which can coalesce into this pain body. What about the ego? We mentioned it earlier. How does that fit into this picture of suffering?
The ego, which Tolley calls the false mind-made self, essentially runs your life as long as you're unconsciously identified with your mind.
And it's inherently fearful.
Yes, because of its phantom nature, he says the ego is very vulnerable and insecure. It constantly perceives itself as being under threat. And emotion, remember, is the body's reaction to the mind. So negative emotions are often the body reacting to the ego's continuous message. Danger, I am under threat.
Which explains that underlying anxiety many people feel.
Exactly. Tolle claims anyone who is identified with their mind and therefore disconnected from their true power, their deeper self rooted in being, will have fear as their constant companion. He goes so far as to say, virtually everyone you meet or know lives in a state of fear. It might vary in intensity from acute anxiety and dread to just a vague unease and distant sense of threat.
So this constant underlying fear drives the ego. What does the ego then seek to try and overcome that fear or fill the perceived lack?
Well, intrinsic to the egoic mind is this deep-seated sense of lack or incompleteness, of not being whole. When it's conscious, it feels like not being worthy or good enough. When unconscious, it's just this intense craving, wanting, and needing.
The endless search for more.
Precisely. People compulsively pursue ego gratification and things to identify with: possessions, money, success, power, recognition, even special relationships, all in an attempt to feel better about themselves, feel more complete.
But it never really works, does it?
He argues it doesn't. Even when they attain all these things, they soon find that the hole is still there, that it is bottomless. The ego is a derived sense of self. It needs to identify with external things. It needs to be both defended and fed constantly.
And what are some common identifications?
Oh, the list is long. Possessions, your job or work, social status, knowledge, physical appearance, special abilities, relationships, personal history, belief systems, political affiliations, nationalistic, racial, religious identities.
All the labels we attach to ourselves?
Exactly. And Tall's stark message is, None of these is you.
Wow. That's a powerful, almost frightening statement. None of these is you. Letting go of all those things we build our identity around. That's huge.
It is. He directly asks the reader, do you find this frightening, or is it a relief to know this? Because, he points out, all of these things you will have to relinquish sooner or later. Maybe you find that hard to believe now, he says, but you will know the truth of it for yourself. You will know it at the latest when you feel death approaching. Death is a stripping away of all that is not you.
So the secret is to let go before you're forced to.
That's the implication. The secret of life is to die before you die and find that there is no death. He also explains the ego's needs are endless. It actually loves problems because it attaches to them to strengthen its illusory sense of self.
So the ego wants problems.
In a way, yes. For many people, a large part of their sense of self is intimately connected with their problems. Once this has happened, the last thing they want is to become free of them. That would mean loss of self. There can be a great deal of unconscious ego investment in pain and suffering.
Okay, this feels like a trap. It seems almost impossible to disidentify from the mind, especially since, as you just said, our ego actively clings to problems and identifications. So what's the ultimate key? How do we break free from this egoic loop?
Tolle gives a very clear key. End the delusion of time.
And the delusion of time.
Yes, he states, time and mind are inseparable. Remove time from the mind and it stops, unless you choose to use it. To be identified with your mind is to be trapped in time. It's the compulsion to live almost exclusively through memory and anticipation.
Always focused on past and future.
Right, an endless preoccupation with past and future, and an unwillingness to honor and acknowledge the present moment and allow it to be. And why? Because the past gives you an identity, and the future holds the promise of salvation, of fulfillment in whatever form. Both, he says, are illusions.
Both past identity and future fulfillment are illusions.
Mm.
Wow. So it really is about shifting out of psychological time.
Yeah.
It sounds like such a profound change in how we experience reality.
It is profound. Tolle states, the essence of what I am saying here cannot be understood by the mind. The moment you grasp it, there is a shift in consciousness from mind to being, from time to presence. And what happens then? Suddenly, everything feels alive, radiates energy, emanates being.
And this shift can happen spontaneously sometimes.
Yes, sometimes in life-threatening emergencies, for example, the personality, the ego, just recedes, and it's replaced by this intense conscious presence, very still but very alert.
Which might explain why some people are drawn to dangerous activities.
Exactly. It forces them into the now that intensely alive state that is free of time, free of problems, free of thinking, free of the burden of the personality. But Tolle quickly adds, you don't need to climb the north face of the Eiger. You can enter that state now.
That's a fascinating link between extreme sports and spiritual states. Were these ideas about the now always present in spiritual traditions, or is this a relatively modern insight?
Oh, absolutely not modern. Tolle emphasizes, since ancient times, spiritual masters of all traditions have pointed to the now as the key to the spiritual dimension. He notes it's maybe not taught in churches and temples explicitly today, but you find it everywhere in the core teachings.
Like in Jesus' teachings.
Yes. Things like, take no thought for the morrow, or nobody who puts his hands to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. Tolle clarifies these aren't just moral lessons or predictions about the end of the world, they're parables about the end of psychological time. They point directly to the transcendence of the egoic mind and the possibility of living in an entirely new state of consciousness.
And other traditions too. Zen, Sufism.
Definitely. He says the whole essence of Zen consists in walking along the razor's edge of now, to be so utterly, so completely present that no problem, no suffering, nothing that is not who you are in your essence can survive in you. Suffering needs time. It can't survive in the now. Zen masters ask things like, what at this moment is lacking? Or simply, if not now, when?
Powerful questions.
And in Sufism, the Sufi is the son of time present, Rumi wrote, past and future veil God from our sight, burn up both of them with fire. And Meister Eckhart, the 13th century Christian mystic, put it so starkly, time is what keeps the light from reaching us. There is no greater obstacle to God than time.
This sounds incredibly liberating, truly. But okay, let's get practical. How do we actually access this power of the verb in our daily lives? How do we move from understanding the philosophy to actually practicing it?
Well, Tully suggests you've probably already had glimpses of it, maybe without even realizing. He shares a story from a listener who described seeing a tree without the screen of mind. really perceiving its essence, its inner spirit, and feeling connected to it, part of it.
It sounds like that being awareness you mentioned.
Exactly, that's awareness of being. And with that timeless dimension comes a different kind of knowing. Not the mind's analytical knowing that can kill the spirit, but a knowing filled with deep love and reverence for all that is, a knowing of which the mind knows nothing.
So the mind knows about the tree, but being knows the tree directly.
That's the idea. The mind cannot know the tree. It can only know facts or information about the tree. And similarly, it can only know labels, judgments, and opinions about people. Being alone knows directly.
So mind knowledge has its place, obviously, for practical things, but it shouldn't dominate and overshadow this deeper being knowledge.
Right. Mind knowledge is essential for the practical realm of day-to-day living. But when it takes over all aspects of your life, it becomes a monstrous parasite that, unchecked, may well end up killing all life on the planet.
Wow, strong words.
They are. And he stresses that just having a beautiful glimpse isn't enough. What's needed is a permanent shift in consciousness.
So what's the practice to cultivate that shift?
The core practice is to break the old pattern of present moment denial and present moment resistance. You need to actively make it your practice to withdraw attention from past and future whenever they are not needed. Just consciously step out of the time dimension as much as possible in everyday life.
And if that direct entry into the now feels difficult,
Then, start by observing the habitual tendency of your mind to want to escape from the now. Just notice it. Notice how the mind constantly projects into the future, imagining it as either better, which creates hope, or worse, which creates anxiety. Both, he reminds us, are illusory.
so the observation itself brings presence.
Yes. Through self-observation, more presence comes into your life automatically. The moment you realize you are not present, you are present. It's a paradox. Whenever you are able to observe your mind, you are no longer trapped in it. A higher level of consciousness is automatically activated.
Okay, that makes sense for general practice. But how does this apply when life throws really tough challenges our way? Situations with strong emotional charges, our minds often go into complete overdrive then.
That's when intense presence is needed, Tolle says. When situations trigger a strong reaction, maybe your self-image is threatened, a challenge brings up fear, things just go wrong, or an old emotional wound gets activated.
The default is often to become unconscious, right?
Yeah.
Taken over by the reaction.
Exactly. You become the reaction. You act it out justifying, blaming, attacking, defending. But Tolle emphasizes that isn't you. It's the reactive pattern, the mind, in its habitual survival mode.
And living in that reactive mode, especially when projected onto the future, can have devastating consequences.
He gives a truly chilling historical example. The estimated 50 million people murdered in the 20th century to further the cause of communism, to bring about a supposedly better world in places like Russia and China. He calls this a stark illustration of how belief in a future heaven creates a present hell. And he asks pointedly, can there be any doubt that psychological time is a serious and dangerous mental illness?
That's a heavy thought. It really highlights the profound danger of living purely for some future ideal, no matter how noble it seems. It's almost like always trying to get somewhere other than where you actually are.
Precisely. Tolle asks you directly, are you always trying to get somewhere other than where you are? Is most of your doing just a means to an end? Is fulfillment always just around the next corner, or maybe confined to brief, fleeting pleasures? He points out that in this common mind-identified state, the power and infinite creative potential that lie concealed in the now are completely obscured. Life just loses its vibrancy, its freshness, its sense of wonder. Old patterns repeat endlessly, and the mind then creates an obsession with the future as an escape from the unsatisfactory present.
So our suffering, our negativity, it's fundamentally rooted in this obsession with psychological time, this resistance to the now.
Yes. Tolle states pretty bluntly, usually the future is a replica of the past. Genuine transformation, he argues, only comes from being present enough to dissolve the conditioning of the past right here, right now. Because the quality of your consciousness at this moment is what shapes the future.
So the future isn't predetermined, it's created by our present state of being.
That's the idea. He sees this potential breaking up of old consciousness, or rather old unconsciousness, as nothing less than a quantum leap in the evolution of consciousness, as well as our only chance of survival as a race. And he says, your cooperation in this is essential.
How does life change when we stop striving away from the now?
When that compulsive striving away from the now ceases, the joy of being flows into everything you do. You're no longer dependent on the future for fulfillment and satisfaction. Success or failure lose their power to dictate your inner state. Neither failure nor success has the power to change your inner state of being. You've essentially found the life underneath your life situation.
That sounds like true freedom, not being constantly tied to external outcomes or some idealized future self.
It really is. In the absence of psychological time, your sense of self comes directly from being, not from your personal history. So the psychological need to become anything other than who you are already is no longer there. You might still pursue goals, absolutely, but in that state of wholeness, you will not have illusory expectations that anything or anybody in the future will save you or make you happy.
So the doing becomes different.
Yes, the doing takes on a playful, joyous energy. You're not demanding that external things or achievements make you happy. He concludes, to be free of time is to be free of the psychological need of past for your identity and future for your fulfillment. It represents the most profound transformation of consciousness that you can imagine.
Is this transformation usually sudden or gradual?
He acknowledges some people experience a dramatic shift, often through total surrender in the midst of intense suffering. But for most of us, he says, we have to work at it. It's a process of moving back and forth between the dimensions of time and presence. And crucially, to know that you are not present is a great success. That knowing is presence, even if initially it only lasts for a couple of seconds.
That's encouraging. Just noticing you're lost in thought is presence.
Tolle also talks about different levels of unconsciousness, doesn't he? From a kind of background static to more acute suffering.
He does make that distinction. Ordinary unconsciousness, he says, means being identified with your thought processes and emotions, your reactions, desires, and aversions. It is most people's normal state. In this state, you're basically run by the egoic mind, and you're unaware of being.
Just the everyday autopilot. Pretty much. Then there's deep unconsciousness. This is an intensified version, a state of more acute and more obvious suffering or unhappiness. It usually happens when things go wrong, the ego feels threatened, there's a major challenge, loss, or maybe conflict in a relationship. This is often when the pain body has been triggered.
And extreme states, like violence.
He states that physical violence would be impossible without deep unconsciousness. It can also happen collectively when a crowd or even a whole nation generates a negative collective energy field. Tolle suggests the best indicator of your own level of consciousness is actually how you deal with life's challenges when they inevitably arise. Do they wake you up more or pull you deeper into sleep?
So it's important to build presence during the calm times.
Exactly. It's essential to bring more consciousness into your life in ordinary situations when everything is going relatively smoothly. This builds what he calls presence power. It generates an energy field of a high vibrational frequency. And in that field, unconsciousness, negativity, even psychic attack from others simply can't survive or take root.
And how do we become aware of that ordinary unconsciousness, that background static?
When you really start to learn to be the witness of your thoughts and emotions, he says, you may be surprised when you first become aware of the background static of ordinary unconsciousness. You might realize how rarely, if ever, you are truly at ease within yourself. There's often this underlying layer of resistance, judgment, discontent, mental projection away from the now, and emotionally, an undercurrent of unease, tension, boredom, or nervousness.
That description, that undercurrent of constant unease, it reminds me of something the psychologist Carl Jung observed about Western society.
Yes, it's a fascinating connection. Jung recounted a conversation with a Native American chief who observed that white people seem to have tense faces, staring eyes, and a cruel demeanor. The chief felt they were always seeking something, always uneasy and restless. His conclusion, we think they are mad?
Wow, we think they are mad.
It's a powerful observation. This undercurrent of constant unease, Tolle suggests, actually predates modern Western civilization, though it manifests acutely within it. He points to Jesus asking, why are you always anxious? Or Buddha teaching that suffering comes from constant wanting and craving. Even Freud, in Civilization and Its Discontents, recognized this unease, but Tolle argues Freud missed its true root and, crucially, the possibility of freedom from it.
And this collective dysfunction has consequences.
Huge consequences. Tolle states this collective dysfunction has created a very unhappy and extraordinarily violent civilization that has become a threat not only to itself but also to all life on the planet.
That's a stark assessment of humanity's current state. So, what can we do about this collective unease and our own personal background static? How do we begin to heal this on a practical level?
The practical steps start with self-awareness. Make it a habit to monitor your mental emotional state through self-observation. Regularly ask yourself simple questions like, am I at ease at this moment? Or, what's going on inside me right now? Then direct your attention inward. Observe the thoughts, the feelings, any physical tension. If you detect unease, see if you can identify how you might be avoiding, resisting, or denying life by denying the now.
And what about dropping negativity once we spot it?
Tully's answer is deceptively simple. How can we drop negativity? His answer, by dropping it.
Just drop it like a hot coal.
Exactly like that, or like unnecessarily heavy baggage, by recognizing that you don't want to suffer the pain or carry the burden anymore and then letting go of it.
So it's not about fighting it or suppressing it, but a conscious decision to release it.
Precisely. Now, he clarifies that deep pain, like the pain body or grief from loss, needs more than just dropping. It needs to be transmuted through acceptance combined with the light of your presence, that sustained witnessing we discussed. But many patterns in ordinary unconsciousness, the everyday stuff, can simply be dropped once you know that you don't want them and don't need them anymore. Once you realize that you have a choice.
And does labeling emotions negative create problems?
He addresses that. He says calling them negative doesn't create the polarity. The polarity was already created when the mind judged the present moment or situation as bad, which then created the negative emotion. While accepting emotions is crucial to avoid acting them out blindly, true acceptance ultimately means reaching a state where negative emotions are not created anymore, because without the mind's judgment and resistance in the first place, they would not arise.
So the goal is non-judgment, non-resistance.
Yes, the idea that everything is okay is ultimately true, he suggests. But most of us don't deeply believe or experience it yet. And he doesn't shy away from the consequences of our collective non-acceptance. He points again to the immense human suffering and violence, over 100 million killed by other humans in the 20th century alone, the ongoing cruelty. He states, only people who are in a deeply negative state, who feel very bad indeed, would create such a reality.
Leading to that challenging conclusion.
Yes, humans are a dangerously insane and very sick species. But he immediately adds, that's not a judgment, it's a fact. It is also a fact that the sanity is there underneath the madness. Healing and redemption are available right now.
That's a crucial counterpoint. A potential for healing is always present. So what's the daily practice to cultivate that sanity, to shift this reality within ourselves?
He offers this advice. Die to the past every moment. You don't need it. Only refer to it when it is absolutely relevant to the present. Feel the power of this moment and the fullness of being. Feel your presence.
And specifically for worry, those what-if thoughts.
If you're worried, caught in what-if loops, Tolle says you are identified with the mind, projecting itself into an imaginary future situation and creating fear. The key realization is, there is no way that you can cope with such a situation, because it doesn't exist. It's a mental phantom.
So how do you stop the phantom?
By acknowledging the present moment. Become aware of your breathing. Feel the air flowing in and out of your body. Feel your inner energy field. Ask yourself honestly, what problem do you have right now? Not next year, tomorrow, or 5 minutes from now. What is wrong with this moment? His point is, you can always cope with the now, but you can never cope with the future, nor do you have to. The answer, the strength, the resource you need will be there when you need it, which is always now.
Okay, so it's about grounding in the reality of this moment, not future fears.
Yeah.
What about prosperity? So many people feel they're waiting for prosperity to arrive, for things to get better financially.
Yes, and Toll has a radical take on that too. He says prosperity cannot come in the future. True prosperity is found now. When you honor, acknowledge, and fully accept your present reality, when you fully accept what you have got, you are grateful for what you have got, grateful for what is, grateful for being. Gratitude for the present moment and the fullness of life now is true prosperity.
So if you feel lack now, millions of dollars won't fix it.
Exactly. If you're dissatisfied now, making millions won't touch the inner condition of lack, because you won't abide in being and so feel the fullness of life now. That alone is true prosperity. He ends the section with a warning. Beware of the ego. The false, unhappy self, based on mind identification, lives on time. It knows that the present moment is its own death, and so feels very threatened by it. It will do all it can to take you out of it. It will try to keep you trapped in time.
We've heard so much about the power of the MER Chi. Now observing the mind, ending the delusion of time. But how do we access this deeper being within us? How do we really ground ourselves in the present, maybe in a more tangible way than just watching thoughts
This is where Tolle introduces another key practice. He suggests one of the most essential tasks on your spiritual journey is actually to reclaim consciousness from the mind by directing attention down into the body, into the physical body.
Yes, but not just the physical structure. He means feeling the body from within, where being can be felt in the first instance as the invisible energy field that gives life to what you perceive as the physical body.
Ah, the inner energy field.
Exactly. He provides a specific practice. He suggests closing your eyes, at least initially, and directing your attention into the body. Feel it from within. Ask yourself, is it alive? Is there life in your hands, arms, legs, and feet, in your abdomen, your chest? Try to feel the subtle energy field that pervades the entire body and gives vibrant life to every organ and every cell. Can you feel it simultaneously in all parts of the body as a single field of energy?
And the key is feeling, not thinking about it.
Yes, keep focusing on the feeling. He says the more attention you give it, the clearer and stronger the feeling becomes. The cells seem to become more alive. Your body might even start to feel somewhat luminous.
So the physical body isn't just a physical structure in this view, it's actually a doorway, a kind of vehicle for this deeper awareness of being.
That's precisely the core of what he calls his Sermon on the Body. He acknowledges that the dense physical structure called the body is not ultimately real, is not you. It's a misperception, he says, resulting from the limitations of our ordinary perception. Yet, and this is crucial, do not turn away from the body, for within that symbol of impermanence, limitation, and death is concealed the splendor of your essential and immortal reality.
Wow, within the symbol of death lies immortal reality.
Yes, the invisible inner body is the doorway into being, into life unmanifested. Through the inner body, you are inseparably connected to this unmanifested one life, birthless, deathless, eternally present. Through the inner body, you are forever one with God.
That's a profound claim. What are the benefits, then, of cultivating this permanent connectedness with your inner body? Does it only impact spiritual awareness, or does Tolle mention other, maybe more tangible benefits, like to our physical health?
He says the key is that permanent connectedness, to feel it at all times. This practice, he claims, will rapidly deepen and transform your life. Why? Because the more consciousness you direct into the inner body, the higher its vibrational frequency becomes.
And a higher frequency offers protection.
Yes. At this higher level, negativity cannot affect you anymore. And you also tend to attract new circumstances that reflect this higher frequency. He states very practically, if you keep your attention in the body as much as possible, you will be anchored in the now. You won't lose yourself so easily in the external world or get lost in your mind. Thoughts, emotions, fears, desires, they might still arise to some extent, but they won't take you over.
And the physical health aspect.
He mentions a great strengthening of the immune system occurs when you inhabit the body more fully. Every cell awakens and rejoices. He says the body loves your attention. It's actually a potent form of self-healing. He even suggests that most illnesses creep in when you are not present in the body.
That's a fascinating idea. And does it affect our mental or emotional resilience, too?
Yes, he says your psychic immune system is greatly enhanced as well, protecting you from the negative mental emotional force fields often generated by others. Not by putting up shields, but by raising the frequency vibration of your total energy field, so that lower frequency negativity now exists in what is virtually a different order of reality. It either doesn't enter your awareness, or if it does, you don't need to offer any resistance to it because it passes right through you.
That's quite a claim.
It is. And Tolle encourages skepticism in a way. He says, please don't just accept or reject what I'm saying. Put it to the test. So a practical suggestion for you listening right now might be, see if you can be in touch with your inner body at the same time, perhaps while listening, reading, or doing everyday tasks. Keep some of your attention within. Don't let it all flow out. Feel your whole body from within as a single field of energy. It is almost as if you are listening or reading with your whole body. Let this be your practice in the days and weeks to come.
What happens if discomfort arises when someone tries this? Maybe agitation or even nausea? Is that a sign they're doing something wrong?
Not necessarily. Tolle explains that if discomfort comes up, it's likely a lingering emotion that was previously residing in the body, unacknowledged. The attention you're bringing is surfacing it.
So what should you do then?
The practice is the same. To just observe the emotion, to feel it fully, and so to acknowledge and accept it as it is. Remember, attention is the key to transformation, and full attention also implies acceptance. Attention acts like a beam of light, the focused power of your consciousness, that transmutes everything into itself. The inner body is your link with the unmanifested,
Hmm.
and ultimately, in its deepest aspect, is the unmanifested. It's consciousness remembering its origin.
And if someone asks for scientific proof?
Tolley's response is direct and experiential. Try it out, and you will be the evidence.
Okay, that makes sense. What if someone finds their mind is just too active, too jumpy, to focus directly on the inner body? Is there a sort of stepping stone into the practice?
Yes, if the mind is really busy, perhaps with worry or anxiety patterns, he says it's usually easier to focus on your breathing first, just conscious breathing. It will gradually put you in touch with the body. Follow the sensation of the breath, perhaps feeling the abdomen rise and fall.
So breath awareness can lead into body awareness.
Exactly. He also suggests a visualization. See yourself surrounded by light or immersed in a luminous substance, a sea of consciousness. Then, imagine breathing that light into your body, feeling it fill you up, making your whole body luminous, and then gently shift your focus from the image to the feeling itself. You are now in your body, he says.
And can this practice go even deeper?
You can. When you become comfortable feeling the inner body as a single, unified energy field, he suggests letting go of any visual or mental images of the physical body. Just let them dissolve. What's left is an all-encompassing sense of presence or beingness, and the inner body is felt to be without a boundary.
Merging with the energy field itself.
Yes, merging with it, transcending the perceived limitations of the physical body. Stay in this realm of pure being for as long as feels comfortable, he advises. Then become aware again of the physical body, your breathing and physical senses, and open your eyes. He describes how this deep inward journey can reach a kind of singularity, a point where the world dissolves into the unmanifested, and the unmanifested takes on form as the energy stream of chi, which then becomes the world.
The point of creation almost. Birth and death.
That's how he describes it, the point of birth and death. And when your consciousness returns to the manifested world, you reassume your familiar form identity. But he says, in one essential respect, you are not the same person you were before. You will have glimpsed a reality within yourself that is not of this world, although it isn't separate from it, just as it isn't separate from you.
Wow. Okay, so it sounds like the now itself and accessing it through the inner body are incredibly powerful doorways. Are there other ways Tolle mentions to access this deeper reality, this unmanifested?
He does. He says the now can be seen as the main portal, and it's actually an essential aspect of every other portal, including the inner body. You can't really be in your body without being intensely present in the now.
Makes sense.
When you dissolve psychological time through that intense present moment awareness, you become conscious of the unmanifested, he says, both directly and indirectly. Directly, it's felt as the radiance and power of your conscious presence. No content, just presence.
Yeah.
Indirectly, you start to feel the God essence in every creature, every flower, every stone, and you realize all that is holy.
That connects back to what Jesus reportedly said. Split a piece of wood, I am there. Lift up a stone and you will find me there.
Exactly, seeing the sacred in everything.
What about things like silence and space? How do they function as portals?
That's another key portal he discusses. The unmanifested is not only present in this world as silence, it also pervades the entire physical universe as space from within and without. He makes a simple but profound point. People pay attention to things in space, but who pays attention to space itself?
That's true. We focus on the objects, not the nothingness around them.
Right, and Tolle says this nothing, this space, is actually the appearance of the unmanifested as an externalized phenomenon in a sense-perceived world. But, he cautions, it cannot become an object of knowledge. You can't do a PhD on nothing. It only works as a portal if you don't try to grasp or understand it with the mind.
So space doesn't exist in the way objects do, but it allows objects to exist.
Precisely. He says space enables everything else to exist. Silence is similar. Space and silence are two aspects of the same thing, the same nothing. They are an externalization of inner space and inner silence, which is stillness, the infinitely creative womb of all existence.
But most people are unaware of this dimension.
He suggests most humans are completely unconscious of this dimension. We know the world, the forms, but they don't know God, the formless essence. We identify exclusively with their own physical and psychological form, unconscious of essence. And because every form is highly unstable, they live in fear. And this fear, of course, distorts our whole perception of ourselves and the world.
So if we look to this nothingness, this space and silence, we find peace, the peace of God.
That's the implication. Tolle quotes that powerful line again from A Course in Miracles. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. When you have that conscious connection to the unmanifested, you still value, love, and deeply respect the manifested world and every life form in it, seeing them as expressions of the one life, but you also know that every form is destined to dissolve again and that ultimately nothing out here matters all that much.
You've overcome the world, as Jesus said, or crossed over to the other shore, as the Buddha put it.
Right. Totally connects this to cosmology, too. Before the Big Bang, he posits, there was no space, as there was no thing. There was only the unmanifested, the One. When the One became the 10,000 things, suddenly space seemed to be there, allowing forms to appear.
So look at the night sky.
Yes, look at the night sky. Billions of galaxies. Incredible. Yet, he says, what is even more awe-inspiring is the infinity of space itself, the depth and stillness that allows all of that magnificence to be. This emptiness is the unmanifested itself, externalized. It is the body of God.
And the miracle is.
That stillness and vastness that enables the universe to be is not just out there in space, it is also within you. It is the still inner space of no mind, infinitely deep. And this naturally leads to that profound question you raised earlier. What is the purpose of all these forms arising and dissolving?
Right. A profound question indeed. What does Tola suggest is the purpose of this divine game, or Leela, as it's called in some Eastern traditions?
Well, he starts by saying everything that exists has being, has God essence, has some degree of consciousness. Even a stone has rudimentary consciousness. So everything is alive. All these myriad forms are simply expressions of consciousness in varying degrees. The ancient seers of India viewed this whole cosmic play as Leela, a kind of divine game that God is playing.
And individual forms aren't the main point of the game.
Apparently not. He notes that most life forms don't survive for more than a few minutes after being born. And even human forms turn to dust pretty quickly. This only seems tragic, he argues. If you create a separate identity for each form, if you forget that its consciousness is God essence expressing itself in form.
So consciousness puts on disguises.
Exactly. Consciousness takes on the disguise of forms until they reach such complexity that it completely loses itself in them. And in present-day humans, he suggests, consciousness has become completely identified with its disguise. It only knows itself as form, and therefore lives in fear of the annihilation of its physical or psychological form.
And that's the egoic mind,
Yeah.
where all the dysfunction sets in.
Right. And this is key, he says. Even this is part of Lila, the divine game. Why? Because, finally, the pressure of suffering created by this apparent dysfunction forces consciousness to disidentify from form and awakens it from its dream of form.
So the suffering pushes consciousness to wake up from the dream.
Yes, it regains self-consciousness, but it is at a far deeper level than when it lost it. He connects this to Jesus' parable of the lost son who leaves home, gets lost in the world, suffers, and then returns home, completely transformed. It describes a journey from unconscious perfection through apparent imperfection and evil to conscious perfection.
And this connects back to the practice of watching the mind.
Directly, Tola states that whenever you watch the mind, you withdraw consciousness from mind forms. That withdrawn consciousness becomes what we call the watcher or the witness. This watcher, which is pure consciousness beyond form, then becomes stronger and the mental formations become weaker. And he adds, this simple act is actually truly of cosmic significance.
Cosmic significance. How so?
Because through you, consciousness is awakening out of its dream of identification with form and withdrawing from form. This personal awakening foreshadows an event that is probably still in the distant future. The event is called the end of the world.
But again, not a literal apocalypse, right? More like the end of psychological time, the end of the egoic dream.
Exactly. The end of consciousness being lost and identified solely with form.
So the end of the world is really a metaphor for a massive collective shift in consciousness. What happens if humanity doesn't make this shift in time?
Well, when consciousness frees itself from form identification, it becomes pure or enlightened consciousness or presence. This has happened fully in a few individuals throughout history, and Tola suggests it seems destined to happen soon on a much larger scale, although he adds, there is no absolute guarantee that it will happen.
And if it doesn't?
He warns, if humans do not free themselves from their mind in time, they will be destroyed by it. We will experience increasing confusion, conflict, violence, illness, despair, madness. The egoic mind, he says, has become like a sinking ship. If you don't get off, you will go down with it. He calls the collective egoic mind the most dangerously insane and destructive entity ever to inhabit this planet. And he poses the challenging question directly to the reader. What do you think will happen on this planet if human consciousness remains unchanged?
That's a sobering thought. He mentions that things like sleep, sex, alcohol, drugs can offer temporary respite from the mind.
Yes, they can suppress excessive mind activity, but he argues these ultimately simply keep you stuck in dysfunction. They delay the breakdown of the old mind structures and the emergence of higher consciousness. They prevent you from generating enough conscious presence to rise above thought and so find true liberation.
So going back to a pre-thinking state isn't the answer either.
No, going back to a level of consciousness below mind, like our pre-thinking ancestors or animals, is not an option. Humanity will have to go on to the next stage. And while consciousness is evolving everywhere, he sees hope. The very fact that I am speaking here and you are listening or reading this is a clear sign that the new consciousness is gaining a foothold on the planet.
Okay, so this is a profound and seemingly necessary evolution for humanity. How does this connect to traditional religious ideas, like a second coming of Christ or the role of enlightened teachers? Are we just waiting for someone external to come and save us?
Tolle offers a very different interpretation. He clarifies that the second coming of Christ is a transformation of human consciousness, a shift from time to presence, from thinking to pure consciousness, not the arrival of some man or woman.
So it's an inner event happening within us.
Yes. The message of Christ, if he were to return externally today, Tolle imagines, would be, I am the truth. I am divine presence. I am eternal life. I am within you. I am here. I am now.
Powerful. And what about enlightened teachers? How should we relate to them?
He strongly advises never to personalize Christ or any enlightened teacher. Without a false self to uphold, defend, and feed, they are more simple, more ordinary than the ordinary man or woman. He notes that egos are often drawn to bigger egos, not to true simplicity. Darkness cannot recognize light. Only light can recognize light. So don't believe the light is only outside you or accessible only through one specific form or person. Any kind of exclusivity is identification with form. And identification with form means ego, no matter how well disguised.
So what is the proper use of a teacher or master?
You should use the master's presence to reflect your own identity beyond name and form back to you, and to become more intensely present yourself. Through that reflection, you'll eventually realize there is no mine or yours in presence. Presence is one.
Okay, so the teacher points you back to the presence within yourself. Is group work also helpful for this process, or is it purely an individual journey?
He says yes. Group work can also be helpful for intensifying the light of your presence. A group of people committed to presence can generate a collective energy field of great intensity, which helps raise individual presence and contributes to freeing collective human consciousness from its current state of mind dominance.
But there's a caveat.
Yes, it needs at least one member who is already firmly established in presence to kind of hold the frequency. Otherwise, the collective egoic mind can easily sabotage the group's intention. So while group work can be invaluable, you must not come to depend on it, nor must you come to depend on a teacher or a master. Ultimately, the source is within.
Because being can't be an object of knowledge.
Exactly. Being cannot become an object of knowledge. In being, subject and object merge into one. Being can be felt, he says, as the ever-present I am that is beyond name and form. To feel and know that you are and to abide in that deeply rooted state is enlightenment, is the truth that Jesus says will make you free. Free from what? Free from the illusion that you are nothing more than your physical form and your psychological self.
Taylor also returns to that challenging idea of collective insanity in the human race, urging us to look honestly at our shared history and our own minds.
He does. He poses the question directly. Do you not belong to the human race that has killed over 100 million members of their own species in the 20th century alone? He quickly clarifies it's not about inducing guilt, but about recognizing that if you're run by the unobserved egoic mind, you are part of the collective insanity.
It's a call for radical self-honesty.
Yes. He urges, open your eyes and see the fear, the despair, the greed, and the violence that are all pervasive. See the heinous cruelty and suffering on an unimaginable scale that humans have inflicted and continue to inflict on each other, as well as on other life forms on the planet. But then he adds, you don't need to condemn, just observe. That is sin. That is insanity. That is unconsciousness. Above all, don't forget to observe your own mind. Seek out the root of the insanity there.
So the starting point is always within.
Always. He concludes this section by saying, you are cut off from being as long as your mind takes up all your attention. When that happens, you are not in your body. This compulsive thinking has become a collective disease. Your identity then comes solely from mind activity, becoming this vulnerable and ever-needy mental construct, which inevitably leads to fear. And the one thing that truly matters is missing, awareness of your deeper self, your invisible and indestructible reality.
This leads us naturally to how these profound insights apply to our most fundamental connections, our relationships. Arguably one of the most challenging and potentially rewarding areas of human life. What does this shift in consciousness mean for love and partnership?
Well, the sources Tola draws on actually suggest that true enlightenment is not possible except through love in a relationship, which is quite a statement.
It really is. How does he explain that?
He says that on a psychological level, that sense of lack and incompleteness we talked about is often felt even more strongly than on the physical level. When you're identified with the mind, you have this externally derived sense of self based on things that aren't truly your social role, possessions, appearance, successes, beliefs, etc. This false self, the ego, feels vulnerable, insecure, and is constantly seeking new things to identify with to feel whole.
And relationships often become a primary focus for that seeking.
Exactly. But the key, Tolle argues, to true love flourishing is developing strong presence within yourself first, so that you no longer get taken over by the thinker or the pain body and mistake them for who you are. He repeats, to know yourself as the being underneath the thinker, the stillness underneath the mental noise, the love and joy underneath the pain is freedom, salvation, enlightenment.
Okay, so that inner freedom is the foundation. How does that actually transform relationships in a practical sense? How do we apply watching the thinker or being aware of the pain body to our interactions with our partners or loved ones?
Well, disidentifying from the pain body means you can bring presence to the pain when it arises in you or your partner, which helps transmute it. Disidentifying from thinking means you become the silent watcher of your thoughts and behavior, especially noticing those repetitive mental patterns and the ego roles you habitually play in the relationship.
So you stop feeding the drama, essentially.
Right. When you stop investing your sense of selfness in the mind's positions and judgments, the mind loses its compulsive quality, the driving need to judge, to resist what is, to be right. The moment that judgment stops through acceptance of what is, he says, you are free of the mind. You have made room for love, for joy, for peace.
And this applies to judging our partners, too.
Crucially, first you stop judging yourself, then you stop judging your partner. He calls this the greatest catalyst for change in a relationship. Complete acceptance of your partner as they are without needing to judge or change them in any way. That act of acceptance, he claims, immediately takes you beyond ego. All the mind games, the addictive clinging, the power struggles, they just end. There are no victims and no perpetrators anymore. No more codependency based on egoic needs.
And what happens then?
You will then either separate in love or move ever more deeply into the now, together into being. He asks, almost rhetorically, can it be that simple? And answers, yes, it is that simple.
Wow, that implies true love isn't about finding someone to complete you or needing someone, but about sharing an inner state of being.
Exactly. He defines love fundamentally as a state of being. Your love is not outside, it is deep within you. It can't be lost, it can't leave you because it's not dependent on another person or any external form. When you access that stillness within, you feel your own formless and timeless reality as the unmanifested life that animates your physical form. And then, spontaneously, you feel the same life deep within every other human and every other creature. You look beyond the veil of form and separation. This is the realization of oneness. This is love.
So God is the one life, and love is feeling that one life within and in everything else.
That's how he puts it. What is God? The eternal one life underneath all the forms of life. What is love? To feel the presence of that one life deep within yourself and within all creatures. To be it. Therefore, all love is the love of God.
And this love isn't selective.
No. He says love is not selective, just as the light of the sun is not selective. It does not make one person special. It's not exclusive. Exclusivity, he argues, is not the love of God, but the love of ego. Now, the intensity of the feeling or the expression of love might vary, but the underlying recognition of being, the bond, is the same whether it's directed towards a partner or a bird, a tree, a flower.
But surely, even in difficult, ego-driven, addictive relationships, there can still be moments of real connection.
Oh, absolutely. He acknowledges that even in those relationships, moments of something more real can shine through. Usually this happens when the minds temporarily subside and the pain bodies happen to be dormant, perhaps during physical intimacy, or witnessing childbirth, or in the unifying presence of death or serious illness.
Which suggests that relationships themselves, even the challenging ones, can become a powerful spiritual practice, a kind of training ground for presence.
Indeed. Tola suggests that as the old egoic mode of consciousness starts to collapse globally, relationships are reflecting this deep state of crisis. Most relationships, he observes, are not rooted in being, and so turn into a source of pain and become dominated by problems and conflict.
But they don't have to be.
No. If both partners agree to make the relationship itself your spiritual practice, things can transform. This means agreeing to express thoughts and feelings immediately and honestly, but without blaming or accusing. And equally importantly, learning to listen openly without defensiveness. This stops grievances from festering. The old patterns of accusing, defending, attacking just become redundant. He also emphasizes giving space to others and to yourself is vital. Love cannot flourish without it.
And when both partners commit to this, when they work on transmuting their pain bodies and disidentifying from mind,
Then, he says, they will experience the bliss of the flowering of relationship. Instead of mirroring each other's pain and trying to satisfy egoic needs, they will reflect back to each other the love that you feel deep within, the love that comes with the realization of your oneness with all that is. This is the love that has no opposite.
that sounds ideal. But what happens if one partner is becoming free from the ego, becoming more present, and the other partner is there yet? That must create a major challenge.
Interestingly, Tolle says if one partner is identified with mind and pain body and the other is relatively free, this will represent a major challenge, not to you, the conscious one, but to your partner.
Why the partner?
Because the ego needs problems, conflict, and enemies to define itself. It will get intensely frustrated when its fixed positions aren't met with resistance, because that threatens its very sense of self. The pain body demands feedback, demands a reaction, and it doesn't get it from a present partner.
That makes sense. The ego needs something to push against.
Exactly. But he also offers a caution here. Beware of people, often men, he notes, who claim enlightenment or presence, but are actually just unresponsive, cut off from their feelings, living in their heads. If there isn't a tangible emanation of love and joy, complete presence and openness toward all beings, then it is not enlightenment. Another good indicator is how someone behaves in challenging situations. Does true enlightenment meet challenges with fear, anger, defensiveness, or with presence?
So presence isn't cold detachment.
Not at all. He gives an example of this dysfunction. A woman feels triggered by an unresponsive man who's lost in his head, lacking presence. Her pain body activates. She attacks him verbally. Blame, criticism. His ego reacts. He defends, counterattacks, and boom, both fall into deep unconsciousness of emotional violence. This destructive cycle repeats until the pain bodies have fed and temporarily subside, only to repeat later. As a general observation, Tolle suggests the main obstacle for men tends to be the thinking mind, while for women, it's often the pain body.
And he elaborates specifically on dissolving the collective female pain body, right? Connecting it back to that historical accumulation of suffering.
Yes, he revisits that point. The pain body has personal aspects, your own past hurts, and collective aspects. Collective pain comes from millennia of human suffering, disease, torture, war, cruelty shared by everyone. Everyone's personal pain body partakes of this collective field. And every woman, he states, shares in the collective female pain body unless she is fully conscious. This includes that accumulated pain suffered by women partly through male subjugation, slavery, exploitation, rape, childbirth, child loss, and so on, over thousands of years.
But again, he frames this not just as a burden, but an opportunity.
Exactly. The emotional or physical pain sometimes experienced, particularly around menstruation, is this collective pain body awakening. And that awakening offers a profound opportunity for enlightenment. He also notes, interestingly, that the number of women who are now approaching the fully conscious state already exceeds that of men and will be growing even faster. He suggests women are regaining their birthright to be a bridge between the manifested world and the unmanifested, between physicality and spirit.
So what is the main task for women in this context?
He says the main task is to consciously transmute the pain body. The intense presence you generate when dealing with the pain body will also free you from identification with the mind. The key is, don't let the pain body use you to create an identity. Use it for enlightenment instead. Transmute it into consciousness. And the time of menses can be a particularly potent time for this practice.
Okay, so it's about seeing this potentially difficult time as a profound spiritual opportunity. How does one actually practice this transmutation when the pain body is active?
The practice is presence. He advises, stay present. Give your complete attention. Watch the turbulence inside you. Know it is there. Hold the knowing and be the knowing. And crucially, remember, do not let the pain body use your mind and take over your thinking. Watch it. Feel its energy directly inside your body. Don't get lost in the thoughts about the pain. Feel the raw energy because, as you know, full attention means full acceptance.
And through that sustained attention and acceptance.
There comes transmutation. The pain body becomes transformed into radiant consciousness. He envisions menstruation then becoming not only a joyful and fulfilling expression of your womanhood, but also a sacred time of transmutation when you give birth to a new consciousness. Your true nature then shines forth, both in its female aspect as the goddess and in its transcendental aspect as the divine being, that you are beyond male and female duality.
That's a beautiful reframing. Now, we often chase happiness in life and relationships, but Tully and the sources he uses make a very clear distinction between happiness and inner peace. Why is that distinction so important?
Yes, it's crucial. He states simply, happiness depends on conditions being perceived as positive. Inner peace does not.
So happiness is conditional, peace is unconditional.
Exactly. And he pushes further, asking, do you truly know what is positive and what is negative? Do you have the total picture? He points out that for many people, things they initially perceived as terrible, limitation, failure, loss, illness, or pain, turned out to be their greatest teacher.
How so?
Because those difficulties taught them to let go of false self-images and superficial ego-dictated goals and desires. Those challenges gave them depth, humility, and compassion. They made them more real.
So adversity can be a catalyst for stripping away the ego.
Yes. And through forgiveness, which he defines essentially as recognizing the insubstantiality of the past and allowing the present moment to be as it is, the miracle of transformation happens, both inside and out. A silent space of intense presence arises within you, and this presence actually affects whoever enters your field. You dissolve discord, heal pain, dispel unconsciousness without doing anything, simply by being and holding that frequency of intense presence.
So again, the ego is at the root of suffering because it's constantly evaluating conditions as good or bad, acceptable or unacceptable.
Precisely. The ego perceives itself as a separate fragment in a hostile universe, seeing other egos primarily as threats or sometimes as tools to be used. Its core operating patterns, resistance, control, power, greed, defense, attack, are all strategies to combat its own deep-seated fear and sense of lack. Ultimately, the ego itself is the problem.
But when we allow the isness of things,
Through allowing the isness of all things, a deeper dimension underneath the play of opposites reveals itself to you as an abiding presence, an unchanging deep stillness, an uncaused joy, beyond good and bad. This is the joy of being, the peace of God. He reminds us that life at the level of form naturally involves cycles: birth, death, creation, destruction, growth, dissolution.
and identifying with those forms leads to suffering when they inevitably change.
Yes, many people cannot distinguish between their life and their life situation. They identify with external conditions, money, job, status, even physical beauty. He gives the example of an actress who lost her beauty and became desperately unhappy and became a recluse. If she had been able to connect with the formless and timeless life within, he suggests, she could have watched and allowed the fading of her external form from a place of serenity and peace.
So her beauty wouldn't have faded, but transformed.
Exactly. Her external form would have become increasingly transparent to the light shining through from her ageless true nature. So her beauty would not really have faded, but simply become transformed into spiritual beauty. However, he adds sadly, nobody told her that this is possible. The most essential kind of knowledge is not yet widely accessible.
That highlights how seeking identity, permanence, or fulfillment through external things is just setting ourselves up for disappointment.
It's a recipe for frustration and suffering.
Ah,
Toll points out, the whole advertising industry and consumer society would collapse if people became enlightened and no longer sought to find their identity through things. Because fundamentally, nothing out there will ever satisfy you except temporarily and superficially. True joy, he insists, is uncaused and arises from within as the joy of being. It is an essential part of the inner state of peace. It is your natural state.
he quotes a Buddhist monk summarizing his learning.
Yes. After 20 years, the monk said simply, all that arises passes away. This I know. What did he mean? Toll interprets. I have learned to offer no resistance to what is. I have learned to allow the present moment to be and to accept the impermanent nature of all things and conditions. Thus have I found peace.
So non-resistance is the key to peace.
To offer no resistance to life is to be in a state of grace, ease, and lightness. And this state isn't dependent on things going well. Paradoxically, he notes, when your inner dependency on form is gone, the general conditions of your life, the outer forms, tend to improve greatly. Things you need or want tend to come with no struggle or effort, because you're aligned with the flow. There's no fear of loss. Life flows with ease.
So happiness derived from external sources is shallow compared to this inner peace.
Yes, it's just a pale reflection of the joy of being, the vibrant peace that you find within as you enter the state of non-resistance. He stresses, even if everything were to collapse and crumble all around you, you would still feel a deep inner core of peace. You may not be happy, but you will be at peace.
This sounds like we could learn a lot simply by observing nature then. Acceptance, living in the now.
He strongly encourages that. Have you ever seen an unhappy flower or a stressed oak tree? He asks. Or a depressed dolphin, a frog that has a problem with self-esteem, a cat that cannot relax, or a bird that carries hatred and resentment. Animals and plants in their natural state teach us acceptance of what is, surrender to the now being. Integrity. He uses the example of ducks fighting at last seconds. Then they vigorously flap their wings, releasing the surplus energy, preventing it from turning into stored negativity or a grievance. Why? They don't have a mind that keeps the past alive with stories.
That connects to the teaching, turn the other cheek.
Tully interprets that phrase as meaning non-resistance and non-reaction, primarily in your inner reality. And he shares that Zen story of Banzan walking through the market and overhearing a butcher tell the customer, "Every piece of meat I have is the best. There is no piece of meat here that is not the best." Banzan was instantly enlightened. The meaning, when you accept what is, every piece of meat, every moment is the best. That is enlightenment.
Okay, that brings us back to this key concept of surrender. As you mentioned, the word itself can sound negative to many people, like giving up, being passive, or resigning yourself to defeat. How does this idea of surrender align with actually making progress, changing things, or taking positive action in the world?
That's a really important clarification, and Tully addresses it directly. True surrender, he says, does not mean to passively put up with whatever situation you find yourself in and to do nothing about it. Nor does it mean to cease making plans or initiating positive action.
So it's not passive resignation. What is it then?
Surrender is the simple but profound wisdom of yielding to rather than opposing the flow of life. Fundamentally, it means to accept the present moment unconditionally and without reservation. It is to relinquish inner resistance to what is. That inner resistance is the mind saying no through judgment and emotional negativity, especially when things go wrong. That gap between what is and what the mind wants to be is the pain gap. Resistance, he states flatly, is the mind.
Okay, so surrender is accepting the isness of the now. But how do we actually do that? How do we let go and surrender that resistance? It often feels easier said than done.
It's definitely a practice, not just a concept. He advises, start by acknowledging that there is resistance. Be there when it happens. Observe how your mind creates it, how it labels the situation. Look at the thought process. Feel the energy of the emotion.
So witness the resistance itself.
Yes. By witnessing the resistance, you will see that it serves no purpose. Then, by focusing all your attention on the conscious. Now, the unconscious resistance is made conscious, and that is the end of it. Because as he repeats, you cannot be conscious and unhappy, conscious and in negativity. Negativity means that there's resistance, and resistance is always unconscious. Surrender isn't something you do once, it's a state you inhabit. Not until you surrender does it become a living reality in your life.
And this state of surrender has power.
Immense power. It emanates spiritual energy of a much higher vibrational frequency than the mind energy that still runs our world. This spiritual energy creates no suffering. It does not pollute the earth and is not subject to the law of polarities, the constant swing between opposites.
What about non-resistance in the face of, say, violence or extreme situations? That's a very difficult concept for many people to accept. Does it mean just letting yourself be harmed?
No, again, he clarifies, non-resistance doesn't necessarily mean doing nothing. All it means is that any doing becomes non-reactive. He points to Eastern martial arts, like Aikido, where you yield to the opponent's force to overcome it. Sometimes doing nothing outwardly, but doing it from a state of intense presence, can be a very powerful transformer and healer of a situation. This connects to the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, often translated as actionless activity, or sitting quietly doing nothing. It implies inner non-resistance and intense alertness, not passive fear or inertia.
But what about major disasters or deep personal crises? Can surrender apply even then?
Tully suggests that for the unconscious majority, unfortunately, only a critical limit situation has the potential to crack the hard shell of the ego and force them into surrender, and so into the awakened state. Often this involves an encounter with death, be it physical or psychological.
Yeah.
The egoic mind simply collapses under the pressure. But then, out of the ashes of the old world, a new world can then come into being.
So even disaster can become a portal, an involuntary alchemical transformation.
Yes. So whenever any kind of disaster strikes, he advises, know that there's another side to it, that you are just one step away from something incredible, a complete alchemical transmutation of the base metal of pain and suffering into gold. That one step is called surrender.
You won't necessarily feel happy in that moment.
No, you won't be happy in the conventional sense. But fear and pain will become transmuted into an inner peace and serenity that come from a very deep place, from the unmanifested itself. It is the peace of God which passes all understanding. Compared to that, he says, happiness is quite a shallow thing, and this deep peace brings with it the direct realization, not just a belief, that you are indestructible, immortal.
What about avoiding pain? Isn't that the natural instinct?
It is, but trying to avoid emotional pain just pushes it into the unconscious. It doesn't diminish its intensity, and it ends up contaminating everything, your relationships, your choices. You might unconsciously broadcast it as negative energy, attracting situations or people that seem to hurt you, or you might unconsciously inflict your pain on others. Tully's point is, when there is no way out, there's still always a way through.
So face the pain directly.
So don't turn away from the pain. Face it. Feel it fully. Feel it. Don't think about it. Express it if you need to, perhaps, but don't create a script in your mind around it. Give all your attention to the feeling, not to the person, event, or situation that seems to have caused it. And critically, don't let the mind use the pain to create a victim identity for yourself out of it. Feeling sorry for yourself just keeps you stuck. The only possibility of change is to move into it, into the feeling itself. Bring a light into this darkness. This is the flame of your consciousness.
And how do we get to this realization, this ability to surrender?
He brings it back to the core practice. When you surrender to what is and so become fully present, the past ceases to have any power. You do not need it anymore. Presence is the key. The now is the key.
And how will you know when you've truly surrendered?
Tully's answer is wonderfully simple. When you no longer need to ask the question.
That's a beautiful and deeply practical way to approach what can seem like a very abstract concept. This surrender, this presence, it also seems to open the door to true compassion, and maybe even to transforming the world around us.
Yes. When you move beyond the mind's constant game of opposites, you become, Tully says, like a deep lake. Your outer life, your circumstances are like the surface of the lake, sometimes calm, sometimes choppy. Deep down, however, the lake is always undisturbed. And you realize you are the whole lake, always in touch with that unchanging depth.
So you don't resist change by clinging.
Right. Your inner peace does not depend on it. You can still enjoy, play with, and create external forms, but without desperate attachment or fear of loss. And when you confront suffering or unconscious behavior in others, you can stay present, stay rooted in your own being, and perhaps even feel the flicker of being underneath their egoic patterns. At the level of being, he states, all suffering is recognized as an illusion. And healing can sometimes occur simply by awakening that being consciousness in others through your own presence.
He talks about two sides of compassion.
Yes. The first is recognizing your shared vulnerability, your shared mortality in physical form. He puts it starkly. A few years from now, both of you will have become rotting corpses, then piles of dust, then nothing at all. Realizing this common fate is humbling and creates a sense of total equality beyond egoic posturing.
And the second side.
The second side is recognizing your shared immortality, the eternal radiant life you both share at the level of being, beyond form. When these two recognitions merge, shared mortality and shared eternity, then sadness for the suffering and joy for the eternal life transmute into deep inner peace, the peace of God.
And this peace has power.
Yes, great healing and transformative power. True compassion, he argues, goes beyond mere empathy or pity. It includes the awareness of the joy of being beyond form, the joy of eternal life.
So our perception of the world directly reflects our inner state of consciousness. How does that actually impact world transformation? Does the world itself change, or just our view of it?
Tolle argues it's both. He states, your perception of the world is a reflection of your state of consciousness. And echoing quantum physics, he says there's no objective world out there separate from the observer. Unity between the observer and the observed. A different way of looking actually changes the phenomena being observed. If you believe deeply in separation and struggle, that's the world you will perceive and help create. The world is only a kind of symbol, like an image in a dream.
Implying infinite possibilities.
An infinite number of completely different interpretations, completely different worlds is possible, and in fact exists, all depending on the perceiving consciousness. Our current collective human world, he says, is largely created through the level of consciousness we call mind.
But if that collective consciousness shifts,
When collective human consciousness becomes transformed, nature and the animal kingdom will reflect that transformation. He refers to biblical prophecies like the lion shall lie down with the lamb, not as literal future events, but as pointers to a completely different order of reality that emerges from a transformed consciousness.
so the world we see now reflects the egoic mind.
The world as it appears to us now is largely a reflection of the egoic mind. Fear being an unavoidable consequence of egoic delusion, it is a world dominated by fear. But when the majority of humans become free of egoic delusion, this interchange will affect all of creation. You will literally inhabit a new world. It is a shift in planetary consciousness. He even suggests, poetically perhaps, that eventually every tree and every blade of grass will eventually become enlightened.
Wow. So our personal healing influence then is not just about what we do out there, but fundamentally about who we are being inwardly.
Yes, your healing influence is primarily based not on doing, but on being. Others will be touched by your presence and affected by the peace that you emanate. Because you're present, you won't feel the need to react to unconscious behavior in others, and so you don't give it any reality. This helps break the karmic cycle of action and reaction. Animals, trees, flowers will feel your peace and respond to it.
So you teach simply by being.
You teach through being, through demonstrating the peace of God. You become the light of the world, an emanation of pure consciousness, and so you eliminate suffering on the level of cause. You eliminate unconsciousness from the world. Now, this doesn't mean you don't also teach through explaining concepts like disidentification, leading practices, etc., but who you are is always a more vital teaching and a more powerful transformer of the world than what you say. And of course, your compassion will naturally manifest by alleviating suffering whenever you come across it on the level of effect.
But the root cause needs addressing.
Yes, because without a change in human consciousness, the world's suffering is a bottomless pit. He advises not to let compassion become one-sided empathy that just pulls you down. Empathy needs to be balanced with the deeper realization of the eternal nature of all life and the ultimate illusion of all pain. When you have that balance, then let your peace flow into whatever you do, and you will be working on the levels of effect and cause simultaneously.
And how should we engage with collective unconsciousness, like trying to change harmful systems?
He cautions against fighting it directly. Just as you cannot fight the darkness, so you cannot fight unconsciousness. If you try to do so, the polar opposites will become strengthened and more deeply entrenched. You'll unconsciously create an enemy, identify with a position, and likely draw yourself back into unconsciousness. Instead, he suggests, raise awareness by disseminating information, or at the most, practice passive resistance. But make sure that you carry no resistance within, no hatred, no negativity. Remember Jesus' teaching, love your enemies, which of course means have no enemies. Ultimately, the causal level needs to remain your primary focus, the teaching of enlightenment your main purpose, and peace your most precious gift to the world. So after that incredibly deep dive, what does this all mean for you? We've explored Eckhart Tolle's profound insights from the power of now, really digging into how our identification with the thinking mind creates these cycles of suffering.
And how that simple yet totally radical act of embracing the present moment, fully accepting what is, can unlock a completely different way of being.
We've learned about the illusory nature of psychological time, the ego's endless needs and fears, and the truly transformative power of connecting with your inner body, cultivating that sense of presence.
Yeah, and if we connect all this to the bigger picture, it becomes pretty clear that this isn't just, an interesting philosophy. Tolle presents it as a direct path to both personal and collective liberation.
We've seen how surrender isn't defeat or passivity, but actually a doorway to a higher vibrational energy, a deeper intelligence.
And how true compassion comes from recognizing both our shared fragility, our mortality, and our shared eternal essence, our being.
We covered a lot today, from challenging those old worldviews about separation and limitation to very practical steps for living in the agenda body, now inhabiting your body and even transforming relationships. As you listened, what really stood out to you? What felt like maybe an aha moment, something that resonated with your own experience?
And maybe here's a final thought to ponder. Considering that science itself shows us that an intelligence far greater than the human mind is clearly at work in the creation and moment-to-moment sustenance of our own bodies, let alone the entire universe. What unimaginable breakthroughs, what incredible transformations might humanity achieve, both individually and collectively, once we learn to consistently tap into that vast, beyond-mind intelligence by truly learning to live in the now?